With us now, Congressman Rick Crawford, Republican from Arkansas. He is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks for being here with us today. Let me start with this because we heard from the Commander-in-Chief over the weekend, the Secretary of State, Secretary of War. I'm told you spoke with Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio as well after we learned about all of this. What did you learn from them, and what do you think the American public should know today?
Well, first off, I learned that this was a very precise strike, the result of several days of waiting for the conditions to be perfect. And those conditions had to be determined by good intelligence, weather, variety of factors. And number two, this was a DOJ-led initiative. So they had at least one FBI agent present. In fact, they once they took Maduro and his wife into custody, they were read their rights before they were evacuated. This was a Title 18 mission with the support of Title 10 assets. That is to say, DOJ, FBI, and then, of course, backed up with military Title 10 assets. And so this was a law enforcement exercise. It was, I think, very well done, and with no loss of life to American forces, and it's about as precise as you can get under these conditions.
How did you find out about it as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee?
I got a call after the fact, and you know, there's been some conversation about that, whether or not they should have notified us in advance. In this case, first off, the congressional notification doesn't necessarily prescribe advance notice. That's number one. Number two, because of the level of operational security, I think it was important that they keep this very close to the vest. And number three, congressional notification does not necessarily imply advance notification. In an instance like this, which was a DOJ-led strike, there's no requirement for congressional notification. However, they did give us notification after the fact, and I think that was sufficient to address any concerns anyone had. Okay. Had this been a military strike, there is a requirement for notification, but not necessarily advance notification. And when you're trying to maintain OPSEC, operational security, at the highest degree, you want to limit the universe of individuals who actually are aware of what's going on.
You don't consider this a military strike?
Well, I don't. Under the authorities of DOJ, obviously, in this context, they needed the assistance of the military to be able to execute that warrant and take these suspects into custody. But let's, be clear about this. I mean, you're going into hostile territory, obviously. But this guy Maduro, I think there are a lot of folks getting wrapped around the axle about, taking a president. And there's been some characterizations of that. And the reality is he's not the president. This is a guy who stole the election, seized power. Everybody knows it. Even the EU recognizes that. Joe Biden recognized that he was not a legitimate president. And President Trump is really the only one that's had really the backbone to say, we're going to make this change, because this guy is under indictment in U.S. court in the Southern District of New York, along with his wife. People didn't realize that she was under sealed in grand jury indictment as well. And so they've got both of those in custody. There's probably others that still need to be taken into custody, but we'll see what happens there. But for the time being, these are two high value targets that were brought to justice by our law enforcement with the assistance of the U.S. military.
All right, so let's look forward here. Here was the Commander-in-Chief Saturday afternoon about potential boots on the ground and the future of Venezuela.
Well, they always say boots on the ground. Oh, so we're not afraid of boots on the ground if we have to have. We had boots on the ground last night at a very high level, actually. We're not afraid of it. We don't mind saying it, but we're going to make sure that that country is run properly.
All right, so let's deconstruct that two ways and start with the end there. We're going to make sure that the country is run properly. Who's running Venezuela now, as you understand it, and is the U.S. involved?
Well, that's a problem because the vice president, Maduro's vice president, has indicated that he is the legitimate president. That's problematic for us because he's obviously not. There's two election cycles now that he has unlawfully retained power, and yet this vice president is making the statement that he needs to be reinstated, that he's the legitimate president. That's not accurate. So that can be a problem for us. what we also have to be careful about is that we don't leave a power vacuum that is filled by bad actors. What we don't want to see is that the vice president there is surrounded by potentially Russian assets that are supporting her, or any other nation that might be supporting her that might create problems for us.
So what should the potential boots on the ground presence with American forces potentially look like? What are you comfortable with?
Well, look, I know that we've used this term "boots on the ground," and from a standpoint of kinetic strikes, you saw with the assistance of the U.S. military a precision strike that required very minimal footprint. Are we going to commit troops large scale? If this had been about that, they would have been a considerably larger scale preparation of the battlefield. And that's not what took place here. So I don't think there is any desire for a large scale boots on the ground, quote unquote, operation. I do think that there's going to continue to be a U.S. presence, particularly I think in the CARICOM region, where we see the Carrier Strike Group present. And that may be enough of a message to anybody in the Maduro orbit to say, maybe we don't want to run the risk of trying to fill that void.
The president also suggested that we might need a presence there to protect the oil infrastructure. Would that not mean American troops there inside Venezuela?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the end state is there, but yes, there is obviously some American interest there. We're going to continue to press American interest as it applies to sanctioned vessels and sanctioned oil. And so when you have that conversation, you're talking about American companies that really have to be recompensated, if you will, for some of the lost oil that they've had out of there. But I'm not sure exactly what the next step is from a diplomatic standpoint in terms of how that country is governed. But I do think that the United States will wield significant influence in that effort.
All right. So on the diplomatic front, and what could potentially come next, President Trump continued to use some harsh language toward Venezuela. He's talked about possible land strikes on drug facilities, on Colombia, potentially there, land strikes in the future. And then the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was also asked about Cuba. Here was the president and the Secretary of State, and then I want to pick it up with you.
He has cocaine mills. He has factories where he makes cocaine. And yeah, I think I stick by my first statement. He's making cocaine. They're sending it into the United States. So he does have to watch his.
One of the biggest problems the Venezuelans have is they have to declare independence from Cuba. They tried to basically colonize it from a security standpoint. So, yeah, look, if I lived in Havana and I was in the government, I'd be concerned, at least a little bit.
How widespread, Chairman, does this potentially become in the region? Is maybe Colombia next, maybe the downfall of communism in Cuba?
Well, I mean, the downfall of communism in Cuba has been coming for a long time. I mean, Cuba is Exhibit A of why the warm collectivism of socialist governments doesn't work, as Mamdani suggested the other day. Cuba is Exhibit A in the failed experiment of communism. But as it applies to the hemisphere, you see countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and unfortunately Colombia. And despite the fact that we still have a very good relationship with the military in Colombia, the fact remains that Gustavo Petro is a problem there and will probably be voted out of office, and that will take care of itself. But as it applies to what steps are next, I don't know what they have planned, but Colombia is certainly a problem for narco trafficking.
Rick Crawford is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee with us here on the Hill Sunday. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.